Tal, good to be with you.
Yes.
Every people is exceptional in its way. What does Jewish exceptionalism mean to you? What's exceptional about Jewish exceptionalism?
Well, I mean, I would say I have my own wish list for the kind of things that we would excel at as a people, given our tradition and given our history. For me, what I would love to see, particularly in a Jewish state, is excellence in 4 areas. Education, in the treatment of minorities, in security, and in the pursuit of peace. I think in those 4 areas, our traditions has so much to say, and our experience has so much to say. And I think that as a people, in a way to kind of align Israel with its kind of Jewish story, its ancient Jewish story, we need to really aspire to greatness in those areas. That's just my personal wish.
You cite Jewish history as the basis for your understanding of the need for Jewish exceptionalism, rather than, say, religious concepts of chosenness. But one could read Jewish history in different ways. One can read the imperative of Jewish history to be wary, to not to be naive, not to pursue peace if the other side is responding with rejectionism.
Well, I see it as a combination of our experience as a people and the values embedded in our tradition, which we need to cherish. And I think we need to be constantly trying to see how to champion those values in the reality we face. And yes, we have to be wary. And I think there's a kind of constant tension between a preoccupation with the welfare of the Jewish body and a preoccupation with the welfare of the Jewish soul. And the two of them go together. We can't be so preoccupied with being wary that in the end we let our aspirations for what might be kind of wither. But we can't be so driven by those aspirations that we lose touch with the realities and the difficult threats we face.
On the fringes of the Jewish left and the Jewish right, one sees precisely that kind of caricature of those who either abandon wariness altogether or abandon any sense of moral responsibility. But how do you see the mainstream in Israel trying to work these issues out?
Well, I think there's a tension I see broadly speaking, between Jews in Israel and Jews outside of Israel. Jews in Israel naturally feel in a much more kind of potent way the challenges and threats in a physical sense. Whereas Jews outside of Israel, a little bit more distant, are able to look at what are the kind of values and principles that Israel's policies are embodying. And so in that sense, I think the tension also exists within both of those societies. And I think the best we can hope for is to really try to hold up both as challenges and needs we need to be conscious of all the time. And we have to be careful not to tilt too far in one direction and, frankly, too far in the other direction in terms of the soul as well. In a way, I would say that our desire to be a people that aspires to greatness in certain areas, that actually embodies values and isn't focused just on the protection of the body, shouldn't be because of a naivety about the Middle East. The Middle East doesn't let you very often engage in that kind of thinking because, peace is around the corner. The reason why...
And yet we do hear that from
You hear that sometimes, yes. But I think our obligation here is to aspire to those things, not because we're naive about the Middle East, but because we are serious about who we want to be in the reality we face. And we don't want to abandon the dreams we have as a people. I think that would be a tragedy if the establishment of Israel in the end led us to, instead of embodying Jewish values, saying, well, this game of sovereignty is too difficult for us to both pursue Jewish values and pursue Jewish physical survival.
So the pursuit of peace is necessary for its own sake, whether or not we actually achieve peace.
Yeah, I think a lot of this preoccupation with values and how they play out in the Jewish story and the Israel story is about the kind of person you want to be. not necessarily the kind of outcome you can achieve, because outcomes in foreign policy in general and in Israel in particular are not just in your hands. There are a lot of forces you don't control, but you do get to choose the kind of character and integrity you have when you deal with those challenges. And that shapes the moral health of your people. It shapes the resilience of your people. It shapes the kind of hope of your children as well, if you embody those characteristics.
What I hear you saying is a kind of model for diaspora-Israel relations, where the diaspora, because of its physical distance from existential threat, North American Jewry in particular, has a responsibility to remind us of the expectations of Jewish exceptionalism. And we, because of where we're sitting, have a responsibility to remind North American Jews, don't mistake your position of comfort for Jewish reality generally.
Well, in a way, but I wouldn't want to generalize it that much. I think that our hope is that we can establish one Jewish conversation where each of these voices is given place, and that Israeli Jews are able to develop that sensibility and hold on to it, and American Jews and others are able to develop that different sensibility. And, I think our tradition is just too broad to be exhausted in one take on what we need to do and how we need to do it. So what we have to do is cultivate a conversation across these lines where all of a sudden the distinction doesn't become clear anymore, where I hear all these voices from everywhere.
Well, I'm sure you've experienced this, Tal, in encounters with American Jews, to suddenly be aware of just how radically different it looks from there and it looks from here. After the Gaza war, I met with a group of rabbis in the U.S., and the pushback about some of the military tactics that we used during the Gaza war of 2014 was the kind of conversation that we almost never have here. We're hunkered down in our shelters, literally and figuratively, and the view from the shelter is not expansive. It's very hard to have a serious moral conversation when you're under missile attack. And so I actually felt grateful for those conversations with American Jews, because they challenged me. They forced me to look a little bit outside the shelter. But I think we have a similar responsibility to them. So yes, you're right. A healthy Jewish persona would be able to encompass both of those parts, but given our circumstances, I think we need each other.
Yeah, I would say something else. There is a degree to which we're in the shelter and we can't kind of emerge from it. But I do worry about how much we are carrying a kind of history of trauma into the way we see the world that doesn't allow us to take full advantage of the fact that we are a sovereign people in our own homeland, that enables us, perhaps while recognizing the threats and realizing how serious they are, at the same time being able to think about other things as well and not allowing those threats to define us. I don't want to limit that exercise to North American Jews. Mm-hmm. I think the Jews of Israel are capable of it, and I think that the privilege of sovereignty, and it is a privilege, it's not a burden. Sometimes we talk about it as if it's just a burden. It's a tremendous privilege. And that privilege enables us as Jews to kind of emerge from the bunker a little bit. And I don't want to leave that task just to North American Jews. I think it's critical for Israeli Jews to be able to incorporate it as well.
The problem, of course, in terms of the privilege of sovereignty, is that Jewish sovereignty is under increasing assault. The very legitimacy of Jewish sovereignty is being called into question in international forums at the UN and elsewhere. And so, Tal, are we obliged to take all criticism that comes from abroad seriously? Are we obliged, because of the demands of Jewish exceptionalism, to hold ourselves to a standard which our enemies, for example, aren't being held by, which will then have serious practical consequences, could lead to the criminalization of the Jewish state?
So I'm a little torn in how I feel about this, in the sense that part of me is a little bit repulsed by the obsession with Israel, by the hypocrisy of the criticism and the double standards. And in that sense, in a way, I want to kind of respond to that criticism and say, a little bit of a reality check, please. And yet another part of me, I think the more Jewish part of me says, we're not in a reality show competition where Israel has to win, and therefore my argument to them is, are you being hypocritical? Are you judging others or judging me by a higher standard? The question I have when I hear that criticism, in part, or I wish that it could be, the only question I would ask is that criticism valid? If it is valid, then even if I don't respect the motives or frankly, the moral integrity of the criticizer, I nevertheless want to be able to look at the criticism as itself and say, well, is this something we should take on board and think about seriously? Now, perhaps I don't need it from an outside voice, but when it comes, I would like to be able to do this kind of twin move.
But aren't we obliged to do both? When you say that perhaps the more Jewish side of you wants to be open to the criticism from wherever it comes, if it's useful, both sides sound pretty Jewish to me. And maybe we need to be giving voice to, on the one hand, our disgust with the nature of international discourse on Israel, on the one hand, and on the other hand, looking at ourselves and holding ourselves up to the standards that we deserve.
What I meant to say with that Jewish side is to say my Jewish fears, I should say, perhaps, require me, frankly, to push back at that criticism and put it in its place. But my Jewish hopes require me also somehow to half listen to it and ask simply an objective question. Is that criticism valid or not valid? Do I need to take it on board, regardless of its source? And if we can, I think we need to do both things, frankly. Both the kind of the rejection of the hypocrisy, and also, frankly, a moral claim against those who are kind of making the moral claim to us. They also have responsibilities, not just us. It's not just about us.
And perhaps we have responsibilities to help them overcome some of their
perhaps
blind spots.
I think so, but we have to be careful for it not to slip, I think, into a kind of discourse of who's more self-righteous, in a way, who's more kind of moral, which it often does turn into, And I'd like us to be able to hold both if we can.
Zionism promised us two things: that it would normalize the Jewish people, make us a state like all other states, and that we would be a light to the nations. Is it possible to be both?
Well, I think if we think about it deeply, we are, given our predicament, we're never going to be both. We're never going to be either. What we're going to do is strive to be both, right? And this goes back to the point before, that the question really about, when you think about the character of a society or the character of the people, it's less about who they are and more about who they're trying to be. It's more about the kind of character you are cultivating in your society. Are you telling the Israeli people, are you telling Jewish people that being normal isn't good enough? That we need to aspire to something greater, which I think is critical to keep, particularly for younger generations, to have something to dream about, right? But at the same time, are you also telling them, what? The Jewish people have rights in this world, right? Basic rights that other people take for granted, rights to self-determination, rights to security and peace and prosperity in a kind of normal way. And those things we also shouldn't abandon, and we should insist upon, not out of some kind of exceptional claim, but out of a claim that comes with being a human being.
I think that what the founders intended was for a Jewish state to be externally normalized and internally exceptional. Does it seem to you sometimes that we might have created the opposite dynamic?
That's an interesting way of putting it. I would like to see us exceptional or striving for exceptionalism in both external and internal, by which I mean I think it's not enough for me at least, to think of us, how do we create a kind of model society or move towards that model society? We have to also ask, in our contribution to the world, in our engagement with the world, what is Israel's special contribution in that respect? So I see our obligations at Exceptionalism going beyond our borders in that sense. And internally also, I think, though it's tempting and somehow justified to say we've got enough troubles, right? In essence, it's not looking at the picture in its full, because we are holding in our hands a great responsibility. A people 3,500 years old who is returning to its ancient homeland and asking, who does it want to be? And if the answer is just, shh, enough now, leave us alone, we can't sustain that either.
So the striving for exceptionalism needs to happen not only in the complicated reality that Israel finds itself in, but with a direct acknowledgement and struggle with that reality, not pretending that we live in a reality in which exceptionalism can flourish without challenges.
Absolutely. I met with a senior diplomat a while ago who said to me that he cares about Israel, but he can't remember why. And that stuck with me. We can't remember why. And everybody needs to develop that why, right? For me, a big part of that why is actually the challenge that the reality puts to us, to see if the values of our tradition, to see if the capacity to be moral and have power can actually work. And that requires, in every instance, not just to ask what a normal people would do, or not just to ask what is necessary to ensure our physical survival, but to ask a different set of questions as well, which is, who do we want to be in dealing with this challenge? What set of values do we want to embody when we are faced with these challenges? And that I see as a great opportunity that sovereignty has given us as a people.
Tom Becker, thank you for being a voice that reminds us who we're supposed to be.
Thank you.